Good afternoon, ScotlandJS. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm CEO and co-founder of the Neighborhoody Software Project, a company for software development. I've just been the leader of the software development team of eHealth Africa, an NGO that was helping with tackling the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. And I'm part of the open source projects Hoodie and CouchDB. Magic. Have you ever looked at the stars at night? Have you ever been far away from city lights, stood somewhere outside and looked at the bright sky above you? Have you ever felt the chill of the night and soon forgotten how cold it was because you just couldn't stop looking at all these stars? And have you ever started wondering if there's more beyond that, more than you can see, and if there's maybe even life somewhere out there? What we see in our night skies is just this tiny fraction of our galaxy, and only imagining our own galaxies, all the various galaxies beyond it, is close to impossible to us. We admire the stars we see, and we're so often unaware that there's so much more beyond them. This is a talk about nothing. Nothing, an abstraction, an impossibility. If nothing actually existed, it wouldn't be nothing. For centuries, scientists have dedicated themselves to nothing. Nothing, or what we've long taken to be nothing, has become a lens through which we can explore the universe around us and what it is to be human. Nothing is the basis of our existence. Take maths, for example. In the first place, huge parts of maths were based on geometrical or physical realities. And while the first evidence of counting stretches back 5,000 years, it took a lot of abstract thinking until the first versions of nothing appeared around 2400 BC. Today, maths now has two versions of nothing. The first version of it is an empty set, like a basket. If there's nothing in it, the basket is analogous to an empty set. Nothing describes the basket. The second version of nothing in maths is zero, the number. If I have no apples in my basket, I have 0 apples. 0 describes the number of apples or elements in the basket or set. And 0, the number, is powerful. If not handled with care, it can bring the entire number system crashing down. To do so, you just multiply any number by 0 and it collapses down to 0. Or, of course, we don't even want to walk into what happens when you divide a number by 0. Today, mathematics is unthinkable without nothing and 0. They both have changed entirely what we can calculate and how far we can go with our numbers. Physicists like Isaac Newton, Albert Einstein, and many more have spent ages trying to figure out a nothing as well. Their main question was, is empty space, like outside the Earth's atmosphere, really empty? But it was not before 1998 that astronomers discovered empty space is not empty. It's permeated by dark energy, the energy that would be left after removing all galaxies, stars, and particles from the universe, and that accounts for more than 70% of the universe's mass. Dark energy is also responsible for accelerating the expansion rate of the universe. Another empty space that physicists looked into is the vacuum. Even if there's vacuum in a box, the box is still not empty. The box, which seems to contain nothing visible for our eyes, still contains an irreducible, hard-to-measure electric field inside it. This is an aerial graphics of the world's largest scientific machine and particle accelerator, the Large Hadron Collider, or LHC. It's located near Geneva, Switzerland. It's a 27-kilometer ring of more than 1,600 superconducting magnets, which are up to 15 meters long. The prime goal of LHC, of which you can see one tiny part here, is to find evidence for the Higgs field. Quite much like dark energy, the Higgs field is believed to permeate empty space. In fact, at the LHC, scientists are trying to find a piece of nothing. In order to find it, the LHC accelerates particles to high speed and tries to make them collide in an ultra-high vacuum. A task quite much like firing two needles 10 kilometers apart with such precision that they meet halfway. In 2012, a particle with characteristics quite similar to the Higgs was found. But still, it's not clear yet if it was the Higgs, if it wasn't, or if various forms of the Higgs exist. No matter what, this nothing is going to touch basics of what we know about the universe. Let's take another look at a nothing which we use every day. Computers, in general, are largely a collection of electronic switches that operate in binary mode. They only know off and on, 0 and 1. The first electronic computers used vacuum tubes as switches, which were super inefficient and made computers huge. The famous ENIAC, for Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer, was used in the US from 1947. It weighed 27 tons, also because it contained more than 17,000 vacuum tubes. And it took up about 170 square meters. I've just calculated that in feet for you. That's around 1,830 square feet. But everything changed in 1947 when the first working transistor was unveiled. The principle that the transistor is based on is quite simple. When electrons get kicked into action by light and are under the influence of chemical elements, they start changing places to fill holes in their electron structure. They start moving because they need to go where there was nothing before. Transistors now power our computers, smartphones, printers, and other digital devices. In a computer chip, the transistors are part of an integrated circuit, or microchip. If you buy a new laptop these days, you'll get a microchip with around 1.3 billion transistors on a chip the size of a fingernail. And it's still based on electrons trying to switch into an empty hole. Nothing is what keeps our digital age running. There is so much more to our realities than we perceive with our senses. What often seems like nothing is the basis of why we are, who we are, and what we do. Same goes for the tech industry. Our computers run on zeros and ones, but our lives as humans are far more complex than that. There's so much more going on in tech than we sometimes realize, and much more to discover beyond our own horizons. These are the nothings we want to talk about today. This talk aims to raise our awareness for them, because they're amongst the most powerful forces that affect our daily lives, including you and me. And they will determine the future of this industry and everyone in it. When we as people in tech today want to understand what's beyond our own perceptions, there are a few things we can learn and skills in which we can train ourselves to become aware of nothings. We live in a society in which power is unevenly distributed. Some groups of people can exist in the society with ease, gain influence, and are accepted without scrutiny or suspicion, which gives them advantages relative to other groups. This means that they have privilege. Privilege comes from various factors like gender, race, class, educational or socioeconomic background, ability, appearance, physical and mental health, and many more. Take me, for example. I pass as a cis woman, which means that my experience of my own gender matches the sex I was assigned at birth. I'm white. I was born into a middle-class family and received education. I'm able-bodied, and my weight and height are within the boundaries of what is socially considered acceptable. And this list is not even exhaustive. This is my privilege, which I recognize and try to act according to. And this means also that my privilege sets limitations for my actions. Understanding our own privileges is a chance to look outside our own experiences and understand oppression. Just sly Red recently said on Twitter about privilege. Privilege isn't wealth or having it easy. It is what you don't have to deal with. Reginald Braithwaite recently wrote, privilege is thinking that offending people means causing offense, because that's what all what words are when you have privilege. Whereas when you are marginalized and or vulnerable, offensive speech is actually about encouraging systemic oppression. Many people in tech are fairly privileged as well. In fact, white, able-bodied, cis-heterosexual men have a near monopoly on the power and money that keeps this tech industry machine spinning. Around 80% of engineering staff at major tech firms like Twitter, Google, and Facebook are men, and between 60 and 95% of all their staff are white. The numbers in open source are very similar. 90 to 95% of all contributors are men. The numbers of women of color, lesbian, gay, queer, bisexual, intersexual, trans people, or people with disabilities are still incredibly low. Tech is an exclusive space with a high entry barrier for the less privileged ones. That much privilege makes for many nothings in this industry. And I want to be very clear about what I mean when I say nothing in this talk. What is nothing and no problem to many privileged people leads to a constant struggle for others. There are underrepresented, marginalized people in tech who are fighting on a daily basis for their sheer existence in this industry. While, on the other hand, a vast number of people in tech have the privilege not to listen, the privilege not to care, the privilege to ignore, the privilege to do nothing, and the privilege to go on with their lives. This is privilege, the luxury to ignore and not care about the experiences of marginalized people in tech, a luxury that no member of a minority in tech has. Recognizing and acknowledging our own privilege means understanding that privilege comes with responsibility. The responsibility to become aware of the issue and our own privileges we hold. Shut up and listen to the experiences of less privileged people. We also need to educate ourselves on topics in which we hold privilege. We need to use our own privilege for good. For example, we need to speak up when we see or hear sexism or racism. We need to stand with less privileged people and amplify their voices. And we need to hold ourselves accountable. We need to listen when people call us out and learn from failing. We can also become allies to less privileged people. Being an ally means being supportive to a marginalized group, and it's a constant, lifelong process. Whatever we do, the responsibility of working through our privilege, listening to others, and acting accordingly is on us, the people who hold privilege. Every day, we make countless decisions without even realizing it. Each of us faces around 11 million pieces of information at any given moment. Our brains can only process about 40 of these, and so they create shortcuts and use past knowledge, experiences, and cultural norms to make assumptions. This is called unconscious bias. We all have these biases, and they cause us to misjudge people or situations. And these biases are critical when we're designing products or building software. Let me give you a few examples of unconscious biases which show how they influence our actions every day, even when, by definition, we're not realizing them. Candidates for a medical school interviewed on rainy days receive 10% lower ratings than those interviewed on sunny days. Job candidates with names that didn't sound stereotypically African American received 50% more callbacks than those with African American sounding names. With the exact same resume, candidates with the name John received a 20% higher rating for competence and a $4,000 higher salary than a candidate with the name Jennifer. When YouTube launched their video upload app for iOS, between 5 and 10% of all videos uploaded were incorrect. They were upside down. But it wasn't people shooting videos incorrectly. The app was designed for right-handed users, but phones are usually rotated 180 degrees when used with left hands. The team had unconsciously created an app that worked best for their almost exclusively right-handed developer team. Another example is about hardware. Zeynep Tufekci, at this time a scholar of social movements, was in Istanbul at the time of the protests in Gezi Park. She had a smartphone with a camera and tried to document what she saw, including violence like tear gas misuse. But she couldn't. Her hands were too small to lift the phone above her head, hold it steadily, and take a picture. She could not document violations of human rights because her hardware didn't allow her to. And I have one more example which just came up very recently. As you may or may not have heard, Apple released the Apple Watch. One of its key features is a built-in heart rate monitor that works by shining infrared or green light through the skin. And this built-in heart rate monitor doesn't work for people with tattoos. There are workarounds for this and for anyone running into the problem, but these workarounds remove some of the conveniences and security features that are supposed to be built in. This is why diversity in experiences, body size, ability, gender, and more aspects is so important. Diversity influences basic questions of equity and accessibility, and these questions are a crucial determinant. They define whether our products are actually usable or not. What helps us in combating these unconscious biases we all have is first education. We need to identify and understand our own biases and help others understand theirs. We need to be mindful of subtle cues because it's the little things that can sometimes make a big difference. We also need to foster awareness in ourselves and others. And again, we need to hold ourselves and others accountable. There's a word that exists in the space between words, where nothing is said, and that we can discover by applying a skill we all have: empathy. Empathy is a powerful and useful skill. It helps us feel and understand the emotions, circumstances, thoughts, and needs of humans around us and our communication with them. Marco Rogers said about empathy, "Empathy means you can relate to another person as though they could be you. You can muster the same compassion for them as you do yourself." As designers, content creators, and developers working on tools which are used by people, we too often don't view the design and code of our software as a complete personal experience. But our users are not single data points or test scenarios. They're humans, and as such, they're carrying past and present pain, joy, their entire life experiences in when they're using what we built. And we do just the same. By all we say and don't say in our software, the wording and the interactions we build, we make communication choices. These choices affect the way our users feel and the interactions we'll have with them. Lena recently wrote, "I wish empathy was less walk a mile in another's shoes and more of believe the experiences of those who walk in shoes different than yours." As people working on software, empathy is our responsibility, and it's a skill we need to practice every day. Empathy allows us to be more supportive of the people that we meet. It can help us change our communities and culture into a positive direction, can make us happier, and helps us understand what's beyond our own horizons. Marco Rogers said, "Building true empathy is hard, but once we actually care about people of color, women, LGBTIQ people, and people with disabilities participating in tech, we'll start to be uncomfortable looking around our all-white, male, cis-heterosexual, able-bodied company." As seen so far, acknowledging our privilege, combating unconscious bias, and practicing empathy are keys to uncovering nothing in tech and acting according to our responsibilities. Now let's look at the tech world of today. Coding and software development both result in computers processing zeros and ones. But code is an enormously powerful tool. Language shapes reality, and programming language can change the realities of people. Just recently, the open source application Be My Eyes launched. It aims to connect non-sighted people with sighted ones. When a non-sighted person is stuck with a certain task, they can ask somebody to help them. Although not without problematics, Be My Eyes has a great approach to be an empowering tool and will hopefully be able to help many people. We can use powerful tools to solve problems. Technology places an enormous amount of power in our hands and minds. What we code can really empower people. And what we code can cause a lot of harm. Code can create limitations, harm, and exclude people. And sometimes just very small changes in an interface can have a big impact. Let's take a look at some examples. Over the past years, there's been an ongoing discussion about real name policies in social networks. Real names usually meaning legal names. Real name policies were originally introduced in an attempt to reduce the veil behind which bullying, harassment, and stalking can occur. But these anti-pseudonymity policies have consequences. They're actively harming marginalized and endangered groups who mostly rely on pseudonyms, like women, LGBTIQ people, people with disabilities, victims of abuse and harassment, activists, whistleblowers, and many more. The cost of these policies to these people can be vast, including harassment, discrimination, actual physical danger, and much more. Instead of protecting people, real name policies harm them. People who either choose to use pseudonyms, want to use a name which is not their legal name, or make an entirely different choice have to be able to do so. Enforcing real name policies in online spaces is an abuse of power. In some tools, avatars show men by default. If the default or unset avatar in your software reads as a man, you're making an implicit statement that your normal user is a man and everyone else is just an exception. Another limitation is created when you just ignore vast parts of your user base, like Apple that released the health application in which you can track basically anything, aside from menstruation. Many software rollouts opt in users into new features automatically, but they tend to damage users unevenly. Usually the ones who are less technical are most affected, and users from marginalized communities are the most likely to be endangered by violations of their privacy. The software we have built can even become an enabler for harassment. One example is, of course, Twitter's constant ignorance of demands for improving their reporting features that has made Twitter unusable for many members of marginalized groups. Another one, again on Twitter, is their feature for sponsored tweets and ads. In their quest to make money from the service, the people of Twitter have set up a feature which is basically a self-service ad console, which you can use to promote anything: your software, your service, your company, or your view of the world. Now people like hacker and fascist Weave, who has quite a history for terrible harassment, are using right this feature for promoting their fascist views and getting these tweets pushed directly into the timelines of women and ethnic minorities specifically. Many people outside the tech industry are also aware that their software constantly, persistently, and pervasively violates their boundaries, but they don't feel they can do anything about it. On a regular basis, we also expose users to dangers for themselves and their work through security flaws. And we may laugh at proprietary vendors engaging in harmful security practices. And we may praise ourselves for providing free and open source software that supposedly gives users the tools to choose their own level of security. But most free and open source softwares are hard to impossible to use for most people. And tools for privacy preservation like the Tor browser or email encryption are still far from being accessible to less technical people. Until we're making these tools straightforward for users, our free and open source software is not providing anything meaningfully better. Nothing meaningfully better than the proprietary software we're laughing about. We're just providing the same bad sandwich on different bread. Still commonly used are also dark UI patterns, user interface design approaches that trick users and manipulate their consent. Like these buttons in an online account deletion process. Users are used to green buttons for expressing their confirmation and red for canceling the process, but not with this software. This one here is a classic dark UI pattern. It tricks users and their consent by using a color scheme just the other way around than what users are commonly used to. This is just one example of many. Dark UI patterns like this and many others are an abuse of power. They trick users' consent and push them into agreeing where they usually wouldn't. By building software, we make rules for spaces. We set up the rules for what people can do and the patterns for their interactions. It's not acceptable when we, the most privileged and powerful ones, make rules for these spaces by writing software that actively endangers marginalized groups. We have written software that enables harassment and stalking, and we've reached a point where users have to permanently distrust the tools they're using, where they cannot rely on anything, and where they're always at risk of having their personal safety at stake. All by what we design and what we code. We have established a state in which users' consent is routinely violated and in which these violations are normalized into invisibility. We need to build accessible products and platforms which value enthusiastic consent, aid users' resistance, and we need tools which help users restore their ability to set and enforce their own boundaries. Chop, 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 ah! What is all this crap? Why is this structure here? Where could this bridge possibly lead? Oh, a sign. This is bridge. This sign doesn't help me much. What a horribly designed street, most inefficient. Good God, what does this contraption do? I hate reading other people's code. Documentation is one of the most valuable things we do. It's the backbone of all our applications. Lack of documentation in our projects or outdated, incomplete docs create invisible limitations and raise entry barriers for people. And then there's, of course, code comments. It takes a little. Undocumented, insufficiently commented projects often speak the language of bad planning, bad management, too much stress, or lack of sustainable thinking. And most of all, they speak of lack of awareness. Lack of awareness for the invisible limitations we create, and lack of awareness that not everyone is like us, and that not everyone has the same experience level or skill set that we do have. With all we do, we need to give people everything to be independent. We need to enable people to be in charge themselves. Do you know where the term software patch originally comes from? Like other programming terms, it originated with Mark I computer, which was used in Harvard from early 1944. Small corrections to the program sequence could be done by patching over portions of the paper tape and repunching the holes in that section. In this picture, you can see two patches in dark gray on the top. There's tiny patches in software documentation that can make a big change, like this patch. A very small pull request to a library that affected only one word in the entire documentation. It was about removing the male-gendered pronoun him and replacing it with the gender-neutral, socially unproblematic they. This tiny patch received 227 comments. Many of the commenting people claiming that they were not interested in small changes like that, and that it was an overall trivial minor change. The discussion exploded, ended up with a heated debate, and people claiming to leave the community. And this is not the only example. Heated debates about the use of gendered pronouns and wordings have been held across several other projects as well. Male gender documentation is still very often the default. It has three clear issues. First, it assumes that men are the default, which is sexist and wrong. 2, it enforces domination of men. And 3, it excludes all people who are not men. Tim Chevalier commented on this pattern as follows. No one ever seems to say that men's desire to protect the status quo is trivial or unworthy of attention. Triviality only gets used to characterize challenges to the status quo, they wrote. Open source is supposed to be fixing what's broken. Patch is welcome, they say. Now here was a patch, and the patch was too trivial. Defenders of the status quo often say this, while the amount of time and energy that they invest in defending the status quo communicate an entirely different message. Another ongoing issue in the tech industry is the domination of whiteness and the massive racism problem. This one is a pull request in Django's docs and tests, and it's about replacing master-slave terminology, terms which carry racially charged meanings. This one pull request got merged pretty quickly, but then the storm arose. It received more than 800 comments, many of them extremely racist and offensive and written by white people, while people of color expressed their appreciation for the change. This industry is still dominated by white men, and they are widely visible everywhere, while other groups and their opinions are erased on a regular basis. In order to make a change, many things will have to happen, and not all of them will be as trivial as the changes of wordings in software documentation, and some of them will be painful. Everything that is in our code, in the documentation and comments, and everything that is between the lines, all of it speaks its own language. There may be nothing, but it's widely visible. The way we handle our code comments and documentation speaks loud and clear about our projects and our communities. In mid-2014, we met with some members of the Hoodie open source project community. We had been working in a distributed team for a long while and now wanted to spend some in-person time together again. After some time, we realized that everybody was feeling a lot of pressure in the open source project to get something ready and released. We realized that we had unconsciously established a shipping culture in the project, a culture that was mainly about getting things done, getting things released, and we had lost awareness of too many too relevant things on our way. We had unconsciously lost track of the humans in our project, and it took this get-together to find out how close many of us were to burning out. Seth Godin wrote, "Ship often, ship lousy stuff, but ship constantly." Jeff Atwood expressed the same, as well as Matt Mullenweg and many other leaders in tech. In tech, we have a shipping culture. We are release focused. Work on stuff, get it out quickly, get users to test it, improve, add new features, release quickly again. Quick iterations can be useful, but the mighty culture we have established around shipping is hurtful. We've come to a point where we ship constantly for the wrong reasons. Shipping culture induces enormous pressure on humans, and the idea of constantly improving ourselves in our personalities, skills, as teams, and in the products we build together is extremely capitalist. When we look at the software that has been shipped in the past few years, may it be in open source or in proprietary software, we more and more often see how it has not improved through shipping, rather to the contrary. Various tools, for example in the database sector, frameworks, runtime environments, have become packed with more and more features, but have become full of flaws and sometimes even unusable. The way we ship now is far from the original idea of getting user feedback in quickly and iterating with them. In fact, we're mostly shipping because of our own company internal interests, deadlines, and just because everybody does it, and we think it's the right thing to do. Software engineering and computer science are still very young fields. We can't solve problems if we don't allow ourselves time to think about them. This is an imperative ignored by our shipping culture, which values doing more than thinking. Shipping culture also excludes non-coding team members, since non-coding related tasks like design, marketing, project management, writing, administration or others often don't lead to things that can be shipped. It also keeps people from looking beyond their own horizons, from looking into one of the numerous pressuring cultural topics which are going on here, because work on cultural topics, as well as work on diversity and being an ally, is nothing that people can ship and earn merit for. This merit-centered approach makes shipping culture even dangerous. A major point in tackling the shipping culture in the Hoodie project was that we changed the focus of our weekly team meetings. Instead of presenting what they shipped, everybody was encouraged to talk about themselves, how they were doing, their personal learnings, failures, and highlights of the past week. Fighting shipping culture is an enormous task, but we found out that for this project, the little things can already make a difference and help relieve some of the constant pressure that we're all facing. Pete Warden recently wrote, "When I'm optimizing code, my intuition about which parts are slowest is often wildly wrong. So I've learned the hard way that I have to profile the hell out of it before I try to fix anything. It's a core skill for dealing with computers. Our gut feelings often don't work. So skepticism becomes a habit. What has surprised me is how we leave that habit behind when confronted with evidence about ourselves. Every statistic out there says there's fewer and fewer women getting computer science degrees and working as engineers. 41% of women leave careers in technologies after 10 years. That's more than twice the number of men. The diversity numbers of large companies in tech are laughable. But still, too many of us fail at even acknowledging that there's a problem. We're used to optimizing all we can out of our code, but when confronted with evidence about our industry, we fail at keeping this attitude. Recently, the huge free and open source conference FOSDEM took place in Belgium. Instead of putting a code of conduct in place to protect their conference attendees and especially underrepresented groups, they just wrote in their conference brochure, "The FOSDEM organizers were surprised to hear that harassment is a common problem at open source conferences around the world." This is tough, and this is bitter, especially given the huge numbers of documented incidents at geek conferences and in communities in the past decades. Being in tech, being in this industry, and not caring about tech culture is a luxury that's only affordable to those with enough privilege to ignore it and too little empathy to care. We hold accuracy so dear when it comes to code, and we just don't care when it comes to making our industry a better place. And improving all our ongoing issues is going to take a lot more than writing code. Status in tech is still mainly defined by meritocracy, the illusion that people be judged by their merit only, that those with merit float to the top, and that they should be given more opportunities and higher rewards. Although not more than an illusion, meritocracy is highly lucrative. It's an asset in careers and companies. It gets people jobs, raises, venture capital, community support, and more. Meritocracy delivers. It delivers for those who are already in power. It delivers for white, cis heterosexual men. As long as these privileged people get to define what merit is, meritocracy will merely reinforce existing power structures. Meritocracy exacerbates the lack of diversity in tech and reinscribes a system of oppression. This illusionary idea that meritocracy has become a weapon we use to find explanations why tech is still a homogeneous space. All underrepresented groups just didn't earn enough merit to become part in it, it says. It uses victim blaming towards those who aren't allowed to succeed in it. And everything which could potentially hurt existing power structures, like diversity work or activism, is deemed as not merit and therefore dismissible. But there's one more side to meritocracy which makes it a double-edged sword. With merit comes visibility, and whilst visibility is great for white cis heterosexual men, it's enormously dangerous for the rest of us. For us, with visibility comes harassment, stalking, threats, emotional and sometimes physical violence. Doing anything that might bring attention always comes with risk. On top of that, earning merit, like through open source work and contributions, often requires a lot of spare time, which many underrepresented people in tech don't have, because pay inequity prevents them from earning as much money as men do, because they need to do care work or domestic work and errands, and more. As long as merit earned is still a core value for relevance of people's voices and one of the main factors we're looking for in hiring, we won't be solving any of tech's ongoing problems. Meritocracy even enforces abuse. Just one example is Linus Torvalds, idol and hero of hackers and nerds and inventor of Linux. He's a brilliant engineer and an unapologetic bad person. He abuses people in public and has been causing a lot of harm to many people and communities. He's been called out for his behavior for decades, and when recently questioned about the lack of diversity in tech, he basically said, "I don't care." Behavior like this is widespread and widely accepted. Right now, you can be an abusive person as much as you want, as long as you contribute technical things. This way, we end up normalizing harassment in our communities. In our communities these days, people don't see an issue with the fact that 95 to 99% of all community members are white cis heterosexual men. In our communities, we don't help the best ideas win, but the best ideas from people with a high level of tolerance for harassment and personal abuse from community leaders. We need to identify and actively stamp out the harmful and dangerous abusive behavior by individuals or hate groups. This needs to be a responsibility for all of us. This is the responsibility we take on as members of a community. Silencing is a tactic that literally lets people, their work and voices disappear. Silencing aims to maintain the dominant class. It's generally used by a person with privilege against a person with less power, to dismiss voices of dissent against privileged majority speak. And it's a quite common pattern to observe in tech. Silencing tactics include explicit and implicit ones. Amongst them are lawsuits filed, verbal threats to safety or professional livelihood, punishment, tone arguments, and more. Woman. Even though the magic community has made progress in recent years, there are still problems with sexism and stores that aren't friendly to women. But as players, we can make a big difference by letting people know what's not okay, and calling out questionable behavior. Man, geez, can't I just have fun playing a game without having to deal with these social issues? Woman, that's the same thing I'm asking for. Tech is still a space where people have to be afraid of consequences when either reporting or speaking up. Thus, speaking out always comes with risks, and these risks have to be weighed. Is it really worth it? What will I gain from it? How will it hurt me in the long run? As ScotlandJS recently wrote, sexism happens everywhere because we live in a sexist society. It's sad that we experience sexism in tech, but ultimately unsurprising. Where the problem comes in is, instead of addressing the issue, when sexism occurs, tech says, if you're uncomfortable, you don't belong. That's the real sexism problem in tech. Not so much that it happens, but that it gets swept under the rug and ignored. Many people dismiss reports of harassment, sexism, racism, discrimination, and more as non-productive and outside their job description. They say things like, while you're complaining, I'll be over here programming. It's a luxury to be able to say that. It's a privilege to be in a position where you can just not care about all these issues. If marginalized people continue to be the only voices in tech who are calling out bad behavior and incidents, they'll continue to be punished for it. They need people to stand up and stand with them. Systems reinforce the stereotypes and unconscious biases of the people who are designing them. The systems we design always contain parts of ourselves, and they're a representation of our own capabilities and limitations. In the worst case, everything we do stays in a very narrow, self-referential mode. Thus, diversity is essential to good design and engineering at a very fundamental level. The privilege and lack of diversity in tech have led to inadequate, insufficient, and very often inexistent tech solutions to women's, queers, and trans people's problems, as well as the problems that people with disabilities face. Basically, to all problems of any group that is not white, cis heterosexual, able-bodied men. This imbalance is even worse for people who face oppression at more than one level. Design processes of systems are problem-solving processes. When we are building software, we build it for users. Thus, building software is an act of representation. And this representation means responsibility. The tech industry is still dominated by white, cis heterosexual, able-bodied men with a ton of privilege. These are the people who have built our infrastructure. And when push comes to shove, these systems protect the people who designed them for their own use, while everyone else is constantly placed at risk. There's a huge difference in the online experience of men and women and other groups. Online users who appear to be women are 25 times more likely to receive threats and sexually explicit messages than online users who appear to be men. And it's even worse for people who face multi-layered harassment experiences, like women of color. Sudette, an African-American woman, once used a photo of a white man in her profile picture, and the harassing and racist tweets she usually received virtually stopped. She said, "As a white man, that was the most fun I had online in terms of actually getting to talk to people and not be insulted by them. I received fewer slurs and people were a lot more interested in my thought process than when I was anything else." Last summer, Gamergate took off, a sustained, coordinated harassment campaign that seeks to drive women out of computing. The harassment these women still face included spreading their private information and home addresses, threats of rape, death threats, including a threat of a mass shooting at a university speaking event. Gamergate, like all harassment, comes with a cost. It comes with higher levels of stress and emotional disturbance. It drives people out of their homes, keeps them from publicly speaking, and it burns their lives to the ground. Game developer and company co-founder Brianna Wu recently wrote about her reality these days. This circus has sucked every bit of joy from a career I once felt destined for. My capacity to fear has worn out, as if it's a muscle that can do no more. During the reign of terror of Gamergate, I have had hundreds of conversations with other women. We're exhausted, we're terrified we'll be next, we're all thinking of quitting. As a friend recently wrote me, it's a very dangerous time to be a woman with an opinion. What can be done about all these issues? Jacqueline Friedman, founder and executive director of Women Action Media, said, "If Silicon Valley can invent a driverless car, they can address online harassment on their platforms." Sorry. They don't lack the talent, resources, or vision to solve this problem. They lack the motivation. The ways that social media platforms are built even enable harassment and abuse. When money is on the line, like in cases around copyright violations, companies magically find ways to remove content and block repeat offenders. We need more egalitarian and empathetic systems architectures. We need political changes in this industry, and we need to address our structural issues. And it's our very own communities that are broken, and each and every one of us, especially the ones amongst us with more privilege and power, needs to help fix them. As Adria Richards recently said, diversity cannot be solved in the vacuum of privilege. Active inclusion to increase diversity starts not with others, but with ourselves. We need to start by exploring our own tendencies to spend time with people who are very similar to us and ask, do we have an aversion, a hidden bias? There are various organizations and individuals who work on improving the culture in this industry. The largest number of them is run and supported by mostly marginalized people again. By now, marginalized people not only have to personally fight a battle for a right to exist in this industry, they also get pressured into doing it for others, while most diversity work still goes underpaid or completely unpaid. Diversity efforts are initiatives to correct systemic inequalities. Fighting the system is hard, and it needs everyone's support, especially the one of people in positions of power. Our diversity work needs to include women as well as queer, intersexual, or trans people, and people of other genders, as well as people with disabilities, and it needs to be aware of people who face multi-layered oppressions. Our diversity work needs to be inclusive. Software increasingly defines the world around us. It's rewriting everything about human interaction, and it's systems built by men for men, with disastrous, dangerous consequences for all other underrepresented groups which still don't truly have a seat at the table. We see masses of women, minorities, and LGBTQ people of all kinds now speaking up about no longer being second-class citizens in tech and geek culture. And the question we're talking about here is, who gets to be the ones to shape the future? All we've looked at in this talk are powerful mechanisms that affect people's daily lives and our entire industry. What we've seen is about structural inequality, structural oppression, an entire industry, communities, and individuals causing harm to one another. What we've seen is about the question who we all want to be and how we want to move on. If we're not speaking out, we're complicit to our existing culture, where the experiences of minorities are systemically denied, erased, and invalidated. We all play a role in setting the standards for the communities we're part of. Thus, every one of us needs to examine our own privilege and use it for good. Each of us needs to figure out what we can do to remove some of the burden that minorities in tech have to carry. We need to educate ourselves about the oppressions people face. We need to work on our empathy to become overall better humans and raise our own awareness towards what's really going on in the tech industry. We need to stop silencing people, fight shipping culture, and stop worshipping meritocracy. We need to recognize the limitations we create for users in our software and fulfill our representation role properly when building it. We need to fund efforts to increase diversity by giving money to individuals and organizations that do this work. We, and especially those of us in positions of influence, need to publicly and actively stand against the nastiness inherent with our culture. We need to acknowledge that all of this is everybody's work. What we need now are deep changes, and they'll mean that our industry won't be the same anymore. And that is a very good thing to go for. Together, we can change this industry and build a better future for it. Slowly, more women, LGBTIQ people, people of color, and people with disabilities will be hired in tech. Slowly, the harmful structures of our existing culture will be examined. Slowly, our industry will become more inclusive. Slowly, we'll move to new professional standards, and slowly, we'll move towards the future. This future we're talking is about justice. It's about an industry without violence, discrimination, exclusiveness, and abusiveness. This future we're talking about is bright and great. And if we all join those who are already working on it, it will soon be visible for all of us. Have you ever looked at the stars at night? Have you ever felt that there might be something beyond them, something we cannot see with our own eyes? More than 40 years ago, Freddie Mercury wrote, "Nothing really matters, anyone can see. Nothing really matters, nothing really matters to me." We need to open our minds, broaden our horizons, and widen our communities to fully understand what really matters. All of us need to work on making this industry a place for everyone, because nothing really matters. Thank you.